Hello, everyone, and welcome to Youth Positively Speaking. My name is Paige Ewing, and I work at Prevention Resources as the multimedia specialist for Positive Youth. Prevention Resources is a nonprofit located in New Jersey that is dedicated to promoting health and wellness of individuals, families, and community through education, collaboration, advocacy, and treatment. As always, I have with me Erin Cohen, the project coordinator of Positive Youth, and my co-host.
Hi, I'm Erin Cohen, like Paige said, and the Positive Youth Initiative focuses on building countywide capacity to reduce substance misuse for youth 9 to 20 here in Hunterdon County.
So today we are joined by Dawn Hale. Dawn owns her own company called Dawn Hale Coaching, and she is a life coach and also a drug and alcohol coach. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about recovery and the many different paths to recovery that there are. So welcome, Dawn, to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored and pleased to be here.
So it is officially September. Fall season is starting, but also September is also National Recovery Month. So a little bit about history about National Recovery Month. So in 1989, SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they launched National Recovery Month, and it's all about increasing awareness surrounding mental health and substance abuse. And at the same time, they wanted to celebrate the success stories and to illustrate that living in recovery is absolutely possible. So every year, SAMHSA picks a theme, and this year's theme is recovery is for everyone, every person, every family, every community. And it's really there to remind people in recovery and those people that support them that recovery belongs to all of us. We're all called to end gatekeeping and welcome everyone to recovery by lowering the barriers to recovery support and in creating inclusive spaces and programs, and also just broadening our understanding of what recovery means for people with different experiences. So that's why we're super excited to have Dawn with us today, because I think a lot of people, when they think about recovery, they think about AA, they think about NA, and they don't realize that there's a whole broad spectrum of recovery and many different ways to recover from a substance use disorder. So that's why I'm super excited to have you here with us, Dawn, to kind of tell us about what are all the different ways of recovery.
Well, thank you. I think I'd like to just address the fact that substance abuse disorder is on a spectrum. And we think that a problem drinker, automatically we think of them as an alcoholic, alcohol dependent. But there are various stages of drinking that are abusive, but not necessarily dependent. And one of my goals is to help people see where they are in relation to their drinking. And if they're concerned about their drinking, how can they get a control, take care of it, and learn other ways of coping and mindful drinking so that they may not have to give up entirely. So for me, I'm a woman in long-term recovery. I went to my first AA meeting when I was 20, and I walked into a smoky room and people were sharing that, well, the gentleman sharing was very old. I think he was 35. And he had shared that he lost his wife, his job, his house, his children from alcohol use. And I could not identify. And I think that's one of the things we try to do is identify and not compare. But at that young age, I compared and I said, this isn't me. These aren't my problems. I don't have a spouse, a job, a house to lose. And it took me 15 years to get to my second AA meeting. And in that time, my drinking progressed because substance use disorder is a progressive disease. And by the time I got into the program, I was 35, and I had had a lot of problems and issues in my past that I do believe, had I learned better drinking ways, mindful drinking, harm reduction, I might have been able to just continue to drink moderately and never had ended up with the addiction that I had, the dependence. So alcohol abuse or use disorder is a spectrum, and we can stop early enough on the spectrum before a drinker becomes dependent. But most people don't realize that there are options and different ways to look at your drinking, control your drinking, manage your life, so that if you are not yet dependent, alcohol can actually be a part of your life safely. And I think sometimes people think, I'm not ready to quit, so they don't try to look at their drinking and their relationship with alcohol. And then what happens is it progresses to dependence, and then options are all gone. There's no option. To explain the spectrum, we have binge drinking. That's the lower end of the spectrum. And binge drinking is defined as 5 drinks for a man and 4 drinks for a woman. And it's very frequent, very common in younger people, particularly as a way of distressing. We're dealing with boredom when we're a little depressed, looking for stimulation. And it doesn't mean that you drink every day. And it doesn't mean you drink, every week. But when you drink too much. And it's surprising that it's just 4 drinks for a woman or 5 drinks for a man. But I think people know when they're a binge drinker. They can't remember things when they wake up. They don't know who they talk to. And they may think, I don't have a problem because I can go all week, all month without drinking again. But when I drink, I can't stop.
Yeah. And we know statistically with youth, if we're just kind of talking about youth too, that youth typically, when they have access to alcohol, because they don't have access to alcohol all the time, that's why they typically binge drink, because when they do have access to it, then that's when they consume a lot more. So adults may drink more on a regular basis and overall drink more than youth do. But when youth drink, they typically do what you're talking about, which is binge drinking.
Yeah, and it's especially evident in colleges and universities, because
Right.
kids can study, do great. They think they have no problem, and then they're totally obliterated over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a good point. The next stage is alcohol abuse. And that would be when people continue to drink in spite of problems at school or work or with their family. They start neglecting their responsibilities. They have trouble with law and drinking and driving. And this is before dependence. So again, my belief is that if we can address abusive drinking and binge drinking before the drinker becomes dependent, then that person may be able to continue to drink throughout their life, occasionally a celebratory experience, that kind of thing. And I think if, as we said earlier, if people think, oh, maybe I don't have to stop completely, this is an option. Now, if we work on moderation management, that kind of thing with a client, and they can't, despite how much they're trying to control it and manage it, they realize they can't, then we recommend total abstinence. And that would be the end stage of the use disorder. Well, death would be, actually, but this would be dependence on alcohol, which we often call alcoholism, and it's psychological and physical. Some of the symptoms are that they crave alcohol when they're not drinking. Of course, they develop a tolerance, so they need more of it more often. They might experience withdrawal symptoms. So sometimes people know the DTs or the delirium tremens and the shaking. Well, you don't have to have shaking in the morning after drinking to be dependent. Some other things might be insomnia, can't sleep at night without drinking, mood swings. And then another symptom is the compulsion, and they drink larger amounts over longer periods of time. And it's ultimately a loss of control over their drinking. And there's an expression, I'm just going to use the male pronoun, but a man takes a drink, the drink takes a drink, the drink takes the man. So if you're at that stage, then you're dependent. So one of the things I want to do with youth, as well as anybody, is look at your drinking. If you're concerned about your drinking, then you do have a problem. people don't just take those drinking quizzes because it's fun. They take it because they think maybe they have a problem. And if I can help somebody before they become dependent, then that's one less person who needs all the assistance that we offer for dependent drinkers, alcoholics, as we say. So alcohol dependence or alcoholism, as we know, and drug addiction causes over $420 billion for our country every year. And if we can prevent the dependence in a drinker at an earlier age, we are much better off as a nation, as a community, and for families. But I think the fear that I have to stop forever turns people off. And so their drinking progresses, and there's fewer and fewer options until they get to total abstinence.
I think that's a really good point that you make about people being afraid because they don't necessarily want to get rid of it completely, but they do find that it's a little problematic, but they're not full blown into dependency. I think that's a great point to make, that you can kind of figure out a way to manage it better. And I know you were talking about coping skills a little bit earlier. We talk about coping skills and prevention all the time, and figuring out ways to deal with life. There's a lot of things that happen, and sometimes people do go to alcohol and then it becomes more of an dependent just to cope. So I like the idea of figuring out the relationship with alcohol so that you can still do it, so that they're not completely afraid, and not wanting to, becoming paralyzed and not wanting to do anything because they don't want to stop fully.
Yeah. And, there's a thought that if you don't want to stop completely, then you are dependent and you have a problem. But there's a gray area in the spectrum. And actually, there's a wonderful woman named Jolene Parker who has a TED Talk on gray area drinking. And I am a gray area drinking coach, as well as an alcohol and drug coach. And it's fabulous because there's a lot of things you can do if you're in that gray area to get out of the gray area. And of course, it would be great if everybody could see their problem drinking and address it right away so that it doesn't become an addiction or alcoholism. But often that's not the case. But let's talk about what happens before dependence and some of the options. There is a movement for medicated assisted treatment, MAT.
Mhm.
And some recovery groups, particularly a 12-step group, really don't believe in medicated assisted treatment. The idea is, nothing at all. And some people that works and some people end up dying. So that looks like something like Suboxone or methadone or naltrexone, even antabuse, which makes the person who takes the antabuse, when they drink, they get sick. I'll have to say, personally, I tried that and it was too late. So what happened is I just wouldn't take it.
Mm.
And then I wouldn't get sick when I drank.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be MAT, medicated assisted treatment. Another one is there's a national movement for harm reduction, and that better is better. And that looks like needle exchange programs, that kind of thing. It's a little more radical than what our country is ready to accept right now. But there's a group called HAMS, HAMS, and you can find them on Facebook and online. That stands for Harm Reduction, Abstinence, and Moderation Support. It's an online peer-supported group. It's free of charge. And the goal is just to change drinking habits for the better. And this is where better is better. So if you used to drink a bottle of wine a night and now you're only drinking half a bottle, it's better. Again, it's not a total abstinence program, and unless you choose that. And the interesting thing too is a lot of these programs I'm going to be speaking about have been online. And when AA started by two white men, we didn't have the technology, we didn't really have the science. And now we have much more science, technology, and I find that sometimes AA is particularly, um, women have a difficult time because it was written by men. It can feel a little misogynistic. There's a chapter to the women, and it's inclusive, of course. But anyway, so these groups started online, and when COVID came, AA moved online as well. And so I think it's opened up a whole world of looking at my drinking. How do I want to be a drinker? What do I want in my life? And then there are all these alternatives and options.
And I'm
So
really glad, Dawn, just really quickly, that you brought up COVID, because Erin and I, we were having a conversation. I mean, obviously we work in prevention, but we also have the recovery center and the family support center here. And we were talking about the impact that COVID has had. And I was like, I think for some people it was great because they could just go to a meeting in their living room and it was super accessible and they didn't have to miss work. But I think for some people too, it was really hard because somebody wasn't in person holding them accountable.
yes, and that's what a recovery coach does. We help our clients be accountable with whether it's daily texting or phone calls. And we set up a structure that the client themselves chooses what looks like the drinking program they want for themselves. And then we help them by holding them accountable. You're right. Yeah. And COVID obviously took a huge toll because on addictions because of the isolation. And isolation is not a friend of dependence. And like you said, the accountability, nobody knows you're home.
Been a real concern because of that isolation, and people that have been in recovery and doing a good job, and when they're relapsing during COVID, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that's why we're having so many more overdose deaths during COVID, because they're not really getting the services that they need, or the isolation is just too much, and then they relapse, and we're seeing the overdoses skyrocket. It really is just tragic in so many ways.
So true. And it is tragic. We are losing possibly the future doctor who could cure cancer, the
Right.
next amazing musician, these wonderful, wonderful people, intelligent, creative people. Doesn't matter. Addiction doesn't pick and choose. Anybody can become addicted. And we're really losing, as a community and families and the world, some amazing people. And it is tragic. So yeah, COVID has shown, I think, how, with the rise in deaths, how people need community. And fortunately, we found community online. But I feel terrible for people who have a drinking problem and they don't know where to go, because they knew there was an AA meeting in the bottom of this church basement, but they
Right.
really don't know how to access it. And a lot of times Zoom has, had some issues with Zoom bombing, where uninvited guests would be showing up and being disruptive. But and then there's secret passwords and all that. It's a little challenging, but some of these other groups like HAMS and Smart Recovery, Moderation Management, have always had an online presence. So it's not that challenging to find them. So another one is called the Moderation Management, MM. And some of these groups want you to be abstinent for 30 days just to get a clean base, so that when you reintroduce alcohol, the person can see how they react to it and if they can then manage it. And so moderation management is not a total abstinent program. And it believes that alcohol abuse is a changeable behavior. That's alcohol abuse, not alcohol dependence. Again, I want to kind of stress that. People hear somebody like me saying, well, you might be able to drink, and then they go off to the races. Is this something you really have to be mindful of. It's easy to be mindful of our drinking with the first drink and maybe even the second drink, but then then we lose our mind and we don't know. So if we have a plan in place and a structure and an accountability partner in AA, it's a sponsor often. It's easier to maintain mindfulness over our drinking. And another group is SMART, SMART, and that's self-management and recovery training, which is another online group. But there are also agencies that offer smart recovery, and you can find it perhaps in your community if you're interested. And it has 4 stages: building and maintaining motivation, coping with changes, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and then living a balanced life. One of the really tragic aspects of substance use disorder is the stigma attached to it. And I'm sure you've addressed that on other podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, currently, we treat abusers and alcohol and drug dependents as criminals, as opposed to a health issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the current biggest health crisis, I believe, in the country. More people die of alcohol use and drug use than heart disease and cancer combined. But these people are now criminals, often seen as criminals, and don't get the treatment. So I'm hoping that as more awareness is present, the stigma will be reduced and people will be able to say, I'm a person in long-term recovery, and feel proud of themselves and not embarrassed or look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that. We talk about the stigma and the shame that's around it. And you're right, it should be celebrated. You know, when you hear somebody that's in recovery, it should be celebrated opposed to a judgment, you know. And one thing that we've talked about with several different guests that have been on our podcast is talking about it's not a moral failing if you have an addiction issue. It happens to anybody. Addiction, like you said, it doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone.
And I remember just the other day, somebody was like, when somebody's like, oh, I have cancer, you don't say, oh, I'm so disappointed in you. But, substance use disorder is a brain disease. It's a disease and it should be treated just like any other disease. And we wouldn't say, I'm so disappointed, because you wouldn't say when somebody's cancer treatment hasn't worked that, oh, I'm so disappointed in you that, your cancer treatment isn't working. And recovery is hard. It is hard. And by talking to people like you and by talking to other people who have had family members or themselves in recovery, you're not going to be perfect every day. And if you are in recovery for the rest of your life, and it is hard work to put in every single day. And so it's like, we have to support people when they struggle and when they fall back, because otherwise they're going to be alone. And just like how you were saying, Dawn, like isolation is not what people in recovery need. They need a strong community of people supporting them and loving them and helping them when or if, they decide that they want to start using again.
And I like hearing about these different paths to recovery, how it doesn't necessarily have to be complete abstinence when you're talking about alcohol, because I think it does allow for people to have a chance at recovery in a way and manage it in a way that's going to be productive for them. And I'm thinking about that whole analogy, Paige, like you said about cancer treatment. What may work for one person may not work for another person. So I like these different options that as a coach that you can give to people.
Yeah, I mean, no two people are alike, but for a good portion, a total abstinence program of 12 steps, for example, does work. But again, as we had addressed earlier, sometimes people are afraid of that. And back to the stigma, users are not bad people. They're sick people.
Right.
And Paige said, it's a mental illness, but it also becomes a physiological illness, and it kills us in our body. it poisons us. So, and I was incorrect. It actually kills more people a year than cancer, heart disease, and diabetes combined. And we hear all about cancer treatment, and people with cancer are pitied, and sort of with diabetes, but it's the most underfunded healthcare issue, I believe. And people are being incarcerated for being sick. So 80% of inmates suffer from a substance abuse disorder, and 40% are in prison for crimes, drug-related offenses. So they don't need to be held captive. They need long-term recovery. And
And do you feel like, Dawn, that there's a shift now? Because I do feel like in the last few years, that there is a shift with trying to rehabilitate people opposed to punish people. I always hear our prosecutor here in Hunterdon County say they're not going to arrest people out of drug addiction or out of this problem that we have. So do you feel like there's been a shift in your experience?
Yeah, there has been. And I think that is one reason why people reach out to me, because they see, okay, this person looks okay, and seems like they have a good life, and maybe they're not a bad person, maybe I'm not a bad person. And the stigma, just the awareness is beginning to help with the stigma, the awareness. So yes, I mean, what we really need to see is the money put into prevention like you guys do, and recovery.
Well, and we're seeing that happening more, that they're putting money in for prevention. And we've talked a lot about these ACEs. We just had an episode a few back about ACEs, which is, the adverse childhood experiences, because almost everyone you talk to that has an addiction to something, whether it's alcohol, whether it's to heroin, whether, marijuana, that they talk about trauma, basically, these experiences. And again, now I'm going back to those coping skills again. They just don't know how to deal with it. And so, we talk about that upstream approach. Let's figure out what's happening to people so that we can prevent that from happening, helping them with programs, finding positive, protective factors, and to offset those risk factors that they're living in. So I'm hopeful that with some of our big legislators getting behind looking at ACEs, that we can prevent some of this.
And that's what I think is so cool about your approach to all of this, Dawn. I mean, not just your approach, but the whole idea of like really looking at this at the abuse stage and not the dependent stage. Because, I think it's very common, maybe stereotype or just thought, that it is all or nothing, and that it's either you're dependent or you're not. And you don't realize that there is, like you said, this gray area in the middle, and there are so many services and so many people who can help people who are in that gray area. And so I think that's why I'm so interested in this topic, because even at our own recovery center, they have AA, they have NA, but they also have like recovery Dharma. That's all about like Buddhist principles, and intertwining those into recovery. They have all these different ways of doing recovery, that I think is really, really important to highlight those, because like you said, everybody's an individual and they're going to need different things to help them go through this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I even like the theme with Sam said this year, where it's talking about recoveries for everyone, every person, every family, every community, because it really does belong to a lot of people. When you talk to people in recovery, they never talk about doing it on their own. There's always someone like you, Dawn, who's a coach or a spouse or a girlfriend or somebody there that's helping them. So it's, everybody can kind of take ownership of that recovery. And I think that is a fantastic idea. I'm glad to use that theme this year.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I think my biggest issue that I'd like to have people understand is that there are other options to recovery and reducing use to total abstinence. If you have become dependent, then abstinence is the only way, because our brains become rewired. And once we have the substance in our bodies, we're off to the races. But I think if I could catch some people in that spectrum before they get to dependence, life would be so much better for them and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So when people realize they're having a problem with their alcohol consumption, it does not necessarily mean they're alcoholic and dependent. But I think they become afraid that, oh no, now I'll never be able to drink again. Kind of as you had said earlier, Erin, they don't look for any kind of support, any kind of treatment, any kind of recovery. And I hope that you've seen from some of the examples I've given other options, many ways to find support. The fact that people are beginning to look at their consumption is huge. It's becoming more aware. It's an issue that's becoming more aware. We have AF, alcohol-free months, AF-free years. There's lots of people online who are celebrating their form of recovery and on different pathways. And better is better, in my opinion. Better is better, unless you can't have anything in your system. I think we need this now more than ever, because alcohol is the only drug that we have to make an excuse not to use.
Mm-hmm.
If you come to my house and I made a nice hot roast and I said, I have a great red wine to go with it, and you said, but I don't want it.
Yeah.
Why not? I bought it. It's perfect. It's the right year. We bully people. If you came to my house and I said, I got some great heroin to go with this pot roast, you'd think I was nuts.
You're right, Dawn. And I've seen women, especially because we know that there is a lot of women out there who that are in recovery from alcohol, talk about this thing right here. And even as a mother, at play dates and at sporting events, there is a lot of alcohol. It's so normalized. We talk about that a lot with prevention. Alcohol is so normalized that if you don't drink, people do look at you like you have a third eye, like, what are you talking about? So you're right. And that's a problem as well, that people cannot respect boundaries, if they don't want to have a drink, at a dinner party or at a baseball game or at a play date.
Yeah, or baby shower. It's so pervasive, and we've normalized it, and it's basically it's poison. But now more than ever, I think, because it's so prevalent and easily obtained, the hard seltzer, hard ciders, cupcake wine, mommy juice. So now more than ever, with alcohol particularly being so normalized in our culture, we need to take a step back and look at our relationship with alcohol or drugs. We have an opportunity to be mindful and decide what is best for us, but only if we pay attention and look at it. So if you need help, one of these programs I would be hopeful would help you, or you'd reach out. You're not alone. There's support in all levels of treatment, and you too can have recovery in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say thank you so much, Dawn, for coming on, for telling us. I learned so much in this episode. I didn't know that any of those existed. So I'm very, very excited to kind of research a little bit more. And I hope that people who are listening, if you might think that you have a problem, also look into those programs. And of course, also for more information about Dawn and her coaching, visit her website at dawnhalecoaching.com. And for those who are struggling with a substance use disorder, please reach out to the Open Door Recovery Center of Hunterdon County. They're a part of PR, and they have wonderful advocates there who can help you with your recovery journey. Their phone number is 908-517-4664. And if you're a family member or a loved one, we talked all about how recovery is for everyone, for every family, every person, every community. So the Family Support Center is there to help those communities and those families cope and learn how they can help their loved one or family member who has a substance use disorder. The family advocates there have lived experience and they'll help guide you during this time. And their phone number is 908-782-3909. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, Dawn. For more information about us and the podcast, please visit our website at njprevent.com/positive youth. And thank you for listening in. We'll see you next time for more Youth Positively Speaking.